Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So I just came across this breaking news that's definitely going to spark a lot of discussion, and I think it's super important for us to unpack what's going on here. Let me start by telling you what's happening with New Zealand and their stance on Palestinian statehood. All right, let's dive in. Now, the Foreign Minister of New Zealand, Winston, has made a pretty big statement at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. He said that New Zealand is not ready to recognize Palestinian statehood. That's a pretty strong statement, right? So what's the context here? Well, Peters made this statement in a national address to the UN, and he emphasized that before New Zealand is willing to recognize Palestinian statehood, aid must be flowing and violence must stop. He also mentioned that the decision to recognize Palestinian statehood is inevitable, but it's not happening right now. Now, this position is interesting because it aligns New Zealand with countries like Singapore and Japan, which have taken a cautious approach. However, it's different from their Five Eyes allies, Australia, the UK, and Canada, who have already formally recognized a Palestinian state. That's a big deal because the Five Eyes are a group of countries that share intelligence and have close diplomatic ties. New Zealand is kind of going against the grain here, which is raising eyebrows. Now, let's talk about the political reactions in New Zealand. The Labour Party and the Green Party have been pretty vocal about this. They've criticized the government's decision, calling it cowardly and warning that it's placing New Zealand on the wrong side of history. That's a pretty harsh criticism, and it shows that there's a lot of tension within the government and the political parties here. So what's the deal with the timing of this decision? The cabinet made an in-principle decision about 2 weeks ago, but they delayed the public announcement until Peters delivered his speech at the UN. That's interesting because it suggests that the government was waiting for the right moment to make this statement, probably to have more impact and to align with the UN's platform. During the address, Peters repeatedly emphasized the urgent need for a ceasefire in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. He also called for the return of hostages held by Hamas since their October 7, 2023 attack on Israel. That attack triggered a sustained Israeli military campaign in Gaza, which has reportedly killed over 60,000 people. So the situation in Gaza is extremely dire, and Peters is clearly making that a central point in his argument for why New Zealand isn't ready to recognize Palestinian statehood. Now let's look at the other side of the story. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been pretty vocal about this too. He's condemned Australia, the UK, and Canada for recognizing Palestine, calling it a huge reward to terrorism. That's a strong statement, and it shows the tension between Israel and these countries. Netanyahu also vowed to block a Palestinian state, accusing European leaders of pushing Israel toward national suicide. That's a pretty harsh accusation, and it's interesting that he's making this speech at the UN, where many of these European leaders are present. He even said that his speech was being broadcast on Israeli military loudspeakers in Gaza. That's a bold move, and it shows how much the conflict has escalated. On the other hand, Palestinian Foreign Ministry official Adel Attiyah described Netanyahu's address as the speech of a defeated man, stating it showed neither vision nor perspective and reflected growing isolation and anxiety of a power that knows it stands on the wrong side of history. That's a pretty strong response, and it's clear that the Palestinians are feeling the pressure from Israel's stance. Now, another point that's been raised is the issue of potential annexation of the West Bank. Some members of Netanyahu's cabinet have threatened this as a way to eliminate prospects for a real Palestinian state. That's a big deal because the West Bank is a key area in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and annexation would make it even more difficult to achieve a two-state solution. New Zealand supports the two-state solution as a means to achieve peace, but they've paused recognition of Palestinian statehood until conditions for peace and humanitarian relief are met. That's the crux of the situation here. So what's the bigger picture here? Well, New Zealand is trying to balance their support for the two-state solution with the current humanitarian crisis in Gaza. They're not recognizing Palestinian statehood yet because they believe that the conditions for peace and aid are not met. However, this stance is causing tension with their Five Eyes allies and is being criticized by their own political parties. It's a really complex situation, and it's clear that the international community is divided on this issue. Now, I want to ask you, the viewers, what do you think? Is New Zealand right to wait for more conditions before recognizing Palestinian statehood? Or should they take a stronger stance? And what about the criticism from their political parties? Is that justified, or is the government making a pragmatic decision? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Also, if you're interested in more analysis on this topic, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We'll be covering a lot more news like this, so don't go anywhere. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay informed.